The air within the vaulted ballroom of the Sapphire Grand in Zurich was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the sharp metallic tang of chilled champagne, a sensory backdrop that would forever be seared into Julian's memory as the setting of his most profound public execution. He stood near a marble pillar, his hand tightening around the stem of a crystal flute as he watched Elowyn, his wife of nearly a decade, hold court at the center of a circle of the city's most influential power brokers. She was radiant in a dress of midnight silk, but her beauty had long since become a hollow shell to him, a decorative mask for the sharpened steel of her tongue. It was during a lull in the orchestral music that she struck, her voice projecting with practiced precision as she recounted a fabricated, mocking anecdote about Julian's supposed professional failings and his private insecurities. The laughter that followed was polite, yet devastating, a collective ripple of condescension from the very people Julian had spent years supporting. He saw the flicker of predatory triumph in Elowyn's eyes as she caught his gaze, a silent confirmation that she found joy in his diminishment. That night, as they rode home in the suffocating silence of their town car, Julian did not argue or protest. Instead, he felt a cold, crystalline clarity take root in his chest, replacing the last embers of his affection with a blueprint for a quiet, absolute demolition. The realization that his marriage had been a carefully orchestrated campaign of emotional attrition did not come all at once, but rather as a slow, agonizing accumulation of memories that he finally allowed himself to examine without the tint of denial. For years, Elowyn had employed a strategy of subtle cruelty, a death by 1,000 cuts that had systematically eroded Julian's sense of self-worth while she solidified her own position in the upper echelons of the tech and design world. She had mastered the art of the backhanded compliment, the sigh of disappointment that followed his every achievement, and the strategic isolation that kept him distanced from his oldest friends. He remembered the nights she had returned home late, smelling of a cologne that wasn't his, only to gaslight him into believing his suspicions were symptoms of a fragile mind. She had treated their life together as a ladder, using his financial resources and social connections as rungs to climb toward a brand of personal fame that required his constant presence as a foil. The bumbling, lucky husband to her brilliant, visionary persona. Every disparaging comment she made in private had been a rehearsal for the public humiliation at the Sapphire Grand, a calculated effort to ensure that when she eventually discarded him, he would be too broken to contest the narrative she had built. Transformation began not with a scream, but with a spreadsheet. In the weeks following the Zurich Gala, Julian adopted a persona of total submission, playing the role of the chastened spouse, while he initiated a systematic investigation into the hidden corners of Elowyn's life. He hired a discreet private intelligence firm, led by a man who specialized in the digital footprints of the elite, to shadow her every move and audit her seemingly untouchable professional empire. The findings were more damning than Julian had dared to hope. Elowyn had not only been engaging in a long-term affair with a primary competitor in her industry, but she had also been funneling assets from their joint accounts into offshore holdings to prepare for a divorce that would leave Julian destitute. He spent his nights in the basement office of their estate, cataloging evidence of her infidelity, her financial malfeasance, and the fraudulent claims she had made in her latest corporate filings. Each discovery was a piece of a puzzle that, once completed, would form a noose. He moved with a glacial patience, ensuring that his digital trail was invisible and his external demeanor remained that of the doting, if slightly dim-witted, husband she expected him to be. The next phase required a legal mind that operated with the same cold efficiency as Julian's new resolve, leading him to the office of Silas Thorne, a litigator known more for his tactical ruthlessness than his courtroom theatrics. In the dim, mahogany-clad sanctuary of Silas's firm, they spent dozens of hours dissecting the prenuptial agreement Elowyn had coerced Julian into signing years ago, a document she believed made her invincible. However, Julian and Silas discovered a series of lifestyle and morality clauses that Elowyn, in her arrogance, had assumed would only ever be used against him. They worked to align the evidence from the private investigators with the specific legal triggers in the contract, ensuring that the proof of her adultery and corporate espionage would not only void her claims to his fortune, but would also trigger a mandatory repayment of the funds she had surreptitiously moved. It was a game of high-stakes chess, where Julian was moving his pieces into position, while Elowyn was still convinced they were playing a different game entirely. Silas marveled at Julian's restraint. There were no outbursts of anger, only a steady, unwavering focus on the total restoration of his autonomy through her complete exposure. The culmination of Julian's planning arrived on the occasion of their 10th wedding anniversary, an event Elowyn had insisted be a grand, televised affair to bolster her public image. The guest list was a who's who of international industry, gathered under the shimmering chandeliers of a private estate they owned on the shores of Lake Geneva. Julian played his part to perfection, greeting guests with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years, fueled by the knowledge of what was to come. When the time arrived for the traditional anniversary tribute, a large projection screen was lowered in the center of the ballroom. Elowyn stood by his side, her hand resting performatively on his arm, expecting a montage of their shared highlights. Instead, the screen flickered to life with a different kind of history. High-definition footage of her clandestine meetings with her lover, time-stamped records of her illegal bank transfers, and recorded conversations where she spoke of her husband and her business partners with a visceral, mocking contempt. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating vacuum as the elite of Zurich witnessed the true nature of the woman they had championed. Julian didn't look at the screen. He looked only at Elowyn, watching as the color drained from her face, her mask of perfection shattering in the cold glow of the truth. The collapse of Elowyn's empire was as swift as it was total. Within 48 hours of the anniversary party, the footage and financial records had been leaked to major news outlets, leading to an immediate revolt from her board of directors and the termination of every high-value sponsorship she held. The social circle she had spent a lifetime cultivating vanished instantly, replaced by a wall of icy exclusion. She was no longer a visionary, but a pariah, whose name was synonymous with fraud and betrayal. Because of the legal groundwork Julian and Silas had laid, the divorce proceedings were a mere formality. The iron-bound clauses of the prenuptial agreement were triggered in full force, stripping her of the luxury penthouse, the offshore accounts, and any claim to the Thorne family legacy. She was left with the wreckage of a reputation that could never be rebuilt, and a mountain of legal fees that would haunt her for decades. The professional world she had manipulated so effectively closed its doors, leaving her to navigate a reality where she was no longer the architect of her own destiny, but a footnote in a story of her own making. In the aftermath of the storm, Julian found himself in a state of quiet, profound equilibrium that he had not experienced since his youth. He retreated to a modest stone cottage in the Swiss countryside, far from the gilded cages and the performative cruelty of high society. The revenge had not been an act of hot-blooded rage, but a necessary recalibration of his world, a removal of a malignant force that had sought to hollow him out from the inside. He spent his days in the garden or reading by the fire, the silence of his home no longer a weapon used against him, but a sanctuary of peace. He felt no lingering malice toward Elowyn. She had simply become a distant shadow, a ghost of a lesson learned at a high price. As he looked out over the mist-covered mountains, Julian realized that the ultimate victory was not the destruction of his enemy, but the reclamation of his own soul. He had played the long game and won, not just his freedom and his fortune, but the quiet, unshakable knowledge that he was finally and irrevocably whole.